Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CertaPay's Coffee Break number 21. Can't believe it, but yes, that's where we are. I hope you all have a delicious coffee. I have my usual, actually, it's not my usual. I have a pour over today, but this is with Temple's Dharma blend, and we made it as a pour over. It's really delicious. I hope you guys all have a coffee. Cindy, what do you have?
Same as always, dark roast, double shot.
All right. Claire, how about you?
I already had my cappuccino, which is really my café con leche, and I'm on overload. So my husband makes it for me in the morning. I've had to reduce that a little bit. Otherwise, I'll be climbing the walls with Cuban coffee.
I love it. So I am your host, Rachel Camella, today, and I'm also going to double as the moderator with Cindy Merkel from our HR team. And today we're so excited to have Claire Vasquez-Peace from our team on board to talk about the OSHA new rules and work comp compliance issues now that we're on the other side of COVID, or in the middle of COVID, really. And Claire is a certified OSHA expert, and she is one of the highest, most knowledgeable OSHA and work comp people we have on our team. So we are super excited to have her presenting this morning. So without further ado, Claire, I'm going to pass the controls to you.
Okay.
And yeah, so everybody welcome Claire.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Rachel. I think this is great. We're on our 21st now, and boy, we've had a lot of things going on for quite a while since our lockdown back in March. And one of the things I always, want to make sure that everyone is healthy, is safe. You're practicing all your CDC guidelines. That is so important. I cannot stress to you the importance of all of this. One of the areas I always love to start off with is the OSHA General Duty Clause. That is an important area that, you said you transferred over to me, right?
Yeah, I made you the host, so you should be able to share your screen now. If you just look for the share screen button, we should be up and running.
Because I'm sharing mine, I'm sorry.
It's okay, we'll figure it out. Let's see what you got. We don't have it yet.
Okay.
Okay, something's happening. Yep, we got it. General Duty Clause.
Perfect. So that General Duty Clause is extremely important that we start off with that, because it will show that the employers, and I'm going to move this around a little bit, that the employers are responsible for this, that each employer, can you see it, right? Each employer has to maintain a place of employment which is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And it's really the employer and the employee's responsibility. This is a win-win situation. Both employee and employer have to follow this. It is not just the employer's responsibility, it's also the employee's responsibility that they have to follow all the OSHA safety guidelines. And, and just keep that in mind. So who's responsible here? At the end of the day, who's responsible? Anyone that's over 10 or more employees is responsible to maintain all the OSHA logs or the injury and illness records, unless you're under the 10 and under, and OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics informs you in writing that you have to maintain the OSHA and illness records. That's the only way you're out of this, but everyone else counts. And all employers are covered by this. It's a responsibility. Now, if you want to know if you're exempt or not, you can always go to the census.gov site. I posted that on there to identify if you're exempt. Maybe you are, maybe you're not, but that's the only way you're gonna know. But now who's responsible again, and who counts in this? Every employee counts. I always hear, well, the seasonals are not, especially with the club industry, or temporaries are not. Well, everyone is responsible. Those that have full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary employees that are classified anywhere in there, whether exempt or non-exempt, they're all counted as this. And one of the areas I really wanted to touch on this is the temporary workers, because if you're working with a temporary agency, a staffing agency, You and the staffing agency have a joint responsibility for maintaining a safe workplace. Just because they're coming from a temporary agency doesn't exclude you from any of the safety hazards. Now, if I have, I always advise, if you're working with a temporary agency, make sure that they sit down with you, virtually or not, however you choose, and have them go over that job description and the physical requirements of the job. Remember, the physical requirements of that job is to stating, hey, this employee has to be standing for 8 hours, or this employee has to be on a roof, or they have to work in outdoors, especially in the clubs, that they know exactly what the physical requirements of that job, because if they bring you the wrong person, let's say, and they have an injury, well, you still have to log that in the OSHA log, and God forbid it becomes a fatality, which I have seen, then you will have a violation, may even be shut down, and on top of that, your workers' comp will go off the roof. Even though it's a temporary employee, you still have that joint responsibility to maintain and ensure that OSHA's training or your hazard communication and your record-keeping requirements are fulfilled, because OSHA can hold you both, the host company, you, and the temporary employers responsible for any unsafe work conditions. So, next time you're hiring from a temporary agency, have them sit down with you, have them go over all your safety protocols, have them sign off on what that job description is, and have them ensure that they are going to bring in the right person. And then once you hire that temporary employee or seasonal, we're talking about seasonal and temporaries, make sure that those seasonal and temporary employees follow all your safety guidelines. They go through all the training, don't leave them out. Ignorance of hazards is not an excuse. So make sure that you as the host employer treat all your temporary and seasonal employees, and like any other workers, the same, providing them the safety training and protecting them as well. Because many times, like I said, I see this as an avenue that some of the companies decide, well, I'll just hire a temporary or seasonal, and I'm not going to be responsible for the workers' comp or any other liability. Yes, you will be, if you are negligent in any of those areas that OSHA specifies. One of the other areas that I always like to talk about is the OSHA Whistleblower Act. I always like to implement one of the policies in the employee handbooks. And OSHA is really reminding the employer that it is illegal to retaliate against workers because they report unsafe or unhealthy working condition. And really, that employee can contact OSHA and say, hey, I'm working for this company and they're not maintaining any safety guidelines. Well, we're in a coronavirus, pandemic right now, and it is, again, they have the right to report any unsafe or unhealthy working conditions during the coronavirus. These acts of retaliation against the employee, which includes termination or demotion or denial of overtime or promotion, or let's say reduction in workplace, that employee has the right to contact OSHA. So the employee also has the right to speak up. They have the right to speak up about any hazards. I think it's always good. We always talk about, when I do a lot of the other OSHA training, we talk about the near misses, and those near misses are excellent examples to show that the employees are actively looking and aware of what's going on in the workplace. So without any fear of retaliation, let them speak up. You need to review the safety and health training in the language they understand, especially for the Creole and Spanish speaking employees that most of you have. They have to receive that same type of training in the language they understand. And this is where I've seen some of the violations that I've been involved in the investigation, is that the employer did not provide the safety training in Spanish. And what happened? It was a fatality. And what happened? The consequences, there was a huge fine against the company and the liability of a lawsuit for failure to provide training in that language that they understand. So I don't want to scare you, but I want to make sure that not looking at deficiencies that are wrong, but let's look at things that are missing and implementing that training. Make sure that the machines that they're using are good machines. Test them first. Also make sure that they're using the proper gloves, masks, especially in food and beverage in the restaurants, that they have these things, that the mask is not halfway on. They're following those CDC guidelines. Look around in some of your hazardous chemicals, ensure that they are labeled, like the hazmat, communication. And, you know, if an employee requests an OSHA inspection, they want to speak to the inspector, you cannot retaliate against them. That is that area that OSHA will get very involved. Again, they have the right to report an injury and get copies of their medical records. So if that employee requests a copy of their medical records, they have a right to receive them. That's their information. And also they have a right to review, you know, again, review any records of any work-related illness and injuries, especially in the OSHA logs. So keep that in mind. Matter of fact, since April of 21 of this year, OSHA has received over 9,300 coronavirus complaints. That's over 9,300 of federal. And statewide, it's been over 29,000 complaints. So the worker risk of occupational exposure to any virus during a pandemic may depend on your industry. You have to put those protocols in place. Does that mean the 6 foot of 6 feet apart, the mask, the gloves? So look at what your industry requirements are and implement those, because even in communities where people are living together, those are high risk, you know, and OSHA labels it in, you know, high, medium high, low, and communities where employees live and work together, those are, you know, and or they're traveling outside of areas that are COVID infected, be mindful of those areas where they're traveling and ask, where are they going? Now, developing, they can develop complications from those illnesses because they're living together and one contracts the virus and the entire home is already, under COVID. So most Americans today will likely be in the lower exposure risk unless they're working in the healthcare or first responders. Those are pretty much the highest ones. So that's a policy I've always liked to see implemented in a handbook. Now, when I spoke about this back on the which I think it was our 8th coffee break, that was a while back. This is, we brought up that back in May 26th, OSHA said, hey, all of a sudden, before it wasn't, but then on May 26th, they said, well, now we want you to record all those COVID illnesses. If a worker is infected as a result of performing a work-related duty. Now, however, the employers are only responsible for reporting these cases if all of the following occurred. That means the case is confirmed, a case of COVID, has to be a positive test, obviously. The case is work-related, let's see, an event of exposure, right? Or contributed to the resulting condition that aggravated a pre-existing injury or illness. Or the case involves one or more of the general reporting criteria, such as medical treatment beyond first aid or days away from work. That's when you need to go back, and I'm going to show you where that where your forms are at in the CertiPay, because that will make your life a lot easier, believe me. Those only if all those 3 cases from the COVID are recordable in your OSHA log. So, I always get the question, what's not recordable, right? There's a number of things that are not recordable. So the general public is not recordable. That obviously that could fall under your general liability. Non-work related event or exposure outside the work environment that, they're not on the work environment, they're doing things on their own. Voluntary participation in a wellness program or in a medical fitness or recreational activity, such as, when they're blood donation, when you have the blood donation, blood donor trucks out there, and, if someone gets hurt, well, that's not recordable because that's a voluntary participation in a wellness program. Preparing food or drink for personal consumption, they may be in the break room and something happens, or that's not recordable. Doing personal tasks on their own, personal grooming, self-medication for non-work related conditions. And let me talk a little bit, go back into this self-medication. Always find out what your employees, if they're taking any types of narcotics or they just left, they've been in medical care. Find out if any of those prescriptions, and you have to be really careful here too because of HIPAA, but if any of those prescriptions cause them, could cause them to become sleepy, or states that they can't operate a machine or equipment, well, we need to be careful that they're not during that period of time. So again, it's a conversation that you need to have with your employees. Careful that you don't share it outside of that of the four walls, and just look at how to reduce that possible injury or illness from occurring because they're just temporarily taking some medication. Mental illness, unless a physician states the employee has a mental illness that is work-related, or a motor vehicle accident commuting to or from work, or even in the parking lot. And the common flu is a big one right now. We're going to flu season. Any contagious disease such as tuberculosis, hepatitis A, or the plague, or if the employee was infected, or if they was infected at work from many of those, these are not OSHA recordable. And again, I'll show you where that form is. So keep that in mind. That's I always have a wonderful little list of what's not recordable. So if you need that list, just let us know. We'll send it over to you. Yeah, you can keep that in there. So as of yesterday, and I'll talk about yesterday, did you know that at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, OSHA has cited 37 establishments for violations, and this is on the low side. And I'll tell you why. That the government's been a little bit too lenient on this, but wait till they start getting reopening and going out there and looking at this. And these 37 cited violations were as a result of employees calling in. And we're looking at over almost 500,000 in penalties, which is nothing right now. I would tell you at the end of the year, we're going to see those numbers even triple, perhaps. The OSHA inspections have resulted in the agency citing the employers for violations for failure to implement a written respiratory protection program. And I'll tell you, a lot of you may not be required to do that, but those are the employees who are working in environments with insufficient oxygen, or where it's harmful, where they're dealing with dust, fog, smokes, mist, fumes, gas, vapors, or sprays are present. You have to make sure that if they're working in that type of industry environment, that they are properly fitted for the use of a respirator. They have received a training and they have a medical evaluation. And that's not a lot of you on here, but if you are dealing with those, especially in the construction industry or in healthcare, perhaps sometimes for first responders, they may require to have those respirators on. Also, the failures of those violations were failure to report an injury or illness or a fatality, or record an injury or illness on the record-keeping forms. So the moment that OSHA is contacted, the first thing, guess what they're going to look at? Is your OSHA logs, and they're going to go back 5 years of your OSHA logs. So make sure that all your OSHA logs are up to date. Look at your loss runs. Make sure that they pretty much mirror each other. Talk to your broker to see if there's anything that was missing in those loss runs as well. And look at what needs to be recordable and non-recordable. That's again important. And another violation was, when I started off, was a failure to comply with the general duty clause of OSHA of 1970. Very simple, that you have to maintain a safe and healthy workplace. So that's those are really important to know, that that number is growing. So what cases need to be recorded on the forms? Well, injury and illness, those work-related, and they meet certain severity criteria. Again, those are things that when you have an injury or illness, speak to your broker, contact them, call your workers' comp carrier, let them know that this is the injury or illness that occurred. Should we be recording it or not? And one of my favorites that I always love to hand out to, and to all my clients is just a little cheat sheet. Hey, at the end of the day, this will give you kind of a viewpoint. What's, when you have to contact OSHA. If it's a fatality, you have to contact them within 8 hours. Was it an amputation or a loss of eye? You have to contact them within 24 hours. So it's kind of a little cheat sheet. Put that, if you need a copy of that, let us know as well too, because it kind of falls into the next category that if it's a death, you have to call OSHA after within 8 hours. 8 hours. If it's within 24 hours, if the employee is an inpatient hospitalization, or one or more of your employees have an amputation, or the employee's loss of an eye as a result of work-related, you must report that to OSHA within 24 hours. So these are things that you have to be mindful as well too. Keep that in mind. What's also recordable, days away from work. And when you're tracking this in the OSHA logs, keep going back, because every day that the employee, one of the things you should look at is every week, just go back and update your OSHA log if that employee is still out as a result of a work-related injury. The maximum amount of days that you can add to that is 180 days. That's what OSHA allows. That's it. So if they've done over 180 days, that's the max you're allowed to put in there. But
Claire, can I interrupt
yes.
you for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
The question came up, and I think it's a good time to answer it. The question is, are you better off logging everything on the form just to cover yourself? So can you just tell them what would be too minor to log?
Well, you're going to record everything. I always say record everything. The difference is what becomes OSHA recordable, and I'll show you at the end where the CertiPay is. What becomes, everything should be recorded. Because let's say, for example, that someone cuts their finger, right? They're in the kitchen preparing for the members. I'm talking about the clubs or the restaurants or the customers, and they cut their finger. Well, they cut their finger, and that incident has to be recorded. In their injury form, they fill it out. I cut my finger. You put first aid. It becomes only first aid. So first aid is not OSHA recordable, but you still have to track it. And I'll explain why. They cut their fingers, they put a Band-Aid, you put peroxide, something there to remove any bacteria. A week later, that employee ends up in the emergency room with an infection because they're diabetic. Well, guess what? What if they had to have their finger amputated? Well, now that becomes OSHA recordable. The first aid is not OSHA recordable, and that's the form where I'm going to send you. I'm going to send you so each one of you has that. It's not recordable, but what becomes recordable now is that they ended up with an infection. They ended up at the emergency room. They are being treated. They have days away from work now. They are, God forbid, they had to have that finger amputated because they were diabetic. So any time, even near misses, I would say even a near miss, track that, because a near miss is a good way to say, hey, we are safety conscious, we're looking at things, and we're tracking that. So when you have your safety meetings, you're looking even at those near misses. A near miss can say, hey, I almost fell over this wire that was on the floor, or this pallet that was in the way, or someone was blocking the exit door. Those are near misses, and those are things that are good to record. But the first aid are not OSHA recordable, but everything should be recordable, because it's in that moment that the employee remembers what they did and what happens, and it's in that moment that you want to identify what risks or need to be immediately removed, right? So those are things that I always say, always document everything. Remember, document. That's your support. Because if you documented it, and let's say the employee comes back and tells you a whole different story, well, now we have a problem. But again, at the end, if a first aid, medical treatment beyond first aid is recordable, if that makes sense. I hope that helps. But I think when you have any of those situations that you have to report a fatality or an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of eye, you have to use one of the methods. Either you telephone OSHA, or you have to go to the nearest OSHA area, which you have to look that up, or you just call the 1-800 number 321-6742. So if you want to document that number down. So you have to contact them. Again, if it's a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of eye, you have to contact them within those 8 hours or 24 hours, or you will be fined. So Cindy, did that answer the question?
Yes, I think
Okay.
we needed the differentiation of what OSHA requires and what we would prefer you as an employer. You know, document everything as an employer, even though it might not be ultimately reportable to OSHA.
No matter how minor it is. I would say no matter how minor it is, like I said, a little cut in the finger has resulted in claims that are over $50,000 because the employer did not report it properly, or thought, and this is where when I get involved, is that the supervisor thought I wasn't a big deal. Well, guess what? That $50,000 plus in attorney fees and your workers' comp mod just went up. It is a big deal. So nothing is ever a minor. Everything should be documented. What changes is that what becomes recordable for OSHA. That's the difference. So I'm going to move on, if that's okay.
No, absolutely. That cleared it up. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm going to talk about those forms that we have in our CertiPay, the OSHA Form 300, the 301, and your summary report. I'm going to go into that in detail and what's the difference between each one. The 301, it's in our CertiPay under the injury reporting. It's one of my favorite areas because it really does save you a lot of time and headaches of trying to fill this out. CertiPay already has this automatically filled out for you. What I want you to do is go back and check to make sure that that information has been filled out. If not, contact your client service team and let them know that it needs to be filled out, because they will fill out, not in this one, at the last one, but which is, I'm going to show you the last one. So this one is the employee, all the information that you're recording from the employee, their name, their date of birth, their date of hire. So what happens, you're capturing all that information. Most important is only answer what the questions require. Don't go into this whole story, because that information that you're capturing in this is going to convert over to the OSHA logs. And that's what, if you have an OSHA inspection, they're going to look at that. Believe it or not, OSHA looks at even in the grammar. So you have to be specific. What happened? What exactly happened? The employee was walking to their desk and slipped and fell. The employee had their left knee was injured. So these are the specific things. Don't start telling too much of a story. Be very specific in that. The summary of work-related injuries is the area that CertiPay kind of fills out at the end. This is what the area that I want you to go back and look at. Your establishment's name should be on there, your industry description, and then at the end of the year, your average number of employees and the average number of hours will already be in there. You don't have to do that, unless you don't have CertiPay, but you don't have to complete any of this. It's already done for you. This is going to be capture the number of deaths, the number of days away from work. That's why it's important for you to go back when you have someone who's been out on a leave because of a work-related injury. Go back every week and update the days away from work. Remember what I said? What was the number of days that OSHA allows? 180 days. That's the max. So that's important. And then, always look at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, before you post this, look at your loss runs, compare it to your OSHA forms, and make sure that they're mirroring each other. Otherwise, there's a discrepancy there. And if there is, contact your broker or your carrier, your workers' comp carrier, and try to identify what's missing. Again, I don't look at what's wrong. It's just what's missing so we can fix it, if that makes sense. So this is an area that I really enjoyed because CertaPay will pretty much do all that work as long as you have all the information properly put in, all the data put into CertaPay. And this is where you're going to go into your CertaPay system. It's going to track it, go into your injury section, so simple, under the HR. And then you're going to open up the employee's name and the case number. You know, it's usually, unless it's, let's say it's an automobile accident or, you know, there's, you know, you have a police case number, that's the case number. Usually don't unless you have one. The date it occurred, again, what exactly happened, was it a fall, a slip, what exactly happened? And if you have a workers' comp claim number in there, put it in there. If you don't, it hasn't been recorded yet. But again, you want to capture Jerry fell on a wet floor and strained his left knee. That's, you know, very specific. Nothing, well, Jerry came in and started working and no. Just be specific. This is the next, this is where it's going to start showing up. I like to fill out everything. The time occurred, the work time that the employee started, what exactly happened, when it was filled, when it was closed. And again, the number of days away from work this is a section where you need to go back and update it every single time. If you have your lost run report, you can go back and fill that section up, where it occurred, what the injury type was the employee, what was the employee doing? They were loading. They fell, and while they were loading on wet floor, and this is what caused it, right? They had a lower back spinal injury. Very specific. Who did they see? All of that. Make sure that you capture that information. So what becomes recordable? Well, look at the bottom of that report, and it says include in OSHA reports, because what did I say? They were days away from work. That becomes recordable. It was beyond first aid. They went to see a physician, Dr. Griffin, and they have been on restricted duty, the two on there. So they have days away from work, 1.5. They're on restricted duty for 2 days now, and they went to see a physician. That's where you do that little check mark at the bottom of it and say it's OSHA recordable. But if none of that was listed on there, there was no days lost, there was no restriction, they haven't seen a doctor, it's not recordable yet. When all of those requirements, then you have to check that little check mark and say it's OSHA recordable. And again, you're always going to always talk to your carrier, workers' comp carrier, because they can tell you whether that employee, how many days the employee has been out, and then you have to update it. So your OSHA logs are right in there. It's under your reports, your HR reports. You have all those reports in there. You know, get comfortable with them. You don't have to go and do a spreadsheet. You don't have to go into the OSHA logs to do something else. Everything in CertaPay is captured there for you, nothing else. And then it all goes into what documentation that you have provided. Again, make sure that the employee has filled out their incident report, the supervisor has filled out their incident report, that you've done a proper investigation, that you remove the root of the problem, go to the root of the problem, remove why that injury was caused, get to the root of the problem. Just because an injury occurred, you don't do anything about it, again, that's ignorance. And that does not help you from a workers' comp claim, because the first thing, you know, these carriers are going to ask, so what did you do, Mr. Employer? Did you remove the problem? Did you remove the pallet? Or the pallet is still sitting there by the door? All these things that they're going to look at. And if someone calls OSHA and they come in, and the first thing they're going to request are your OSHA logs. So make sure they're all updated. Go back 5 years. This is a good time to clean house. And don't assume that because it's recorded, it does not prove it's an OSHA violation. It proves that you are following OSHA guidelines. Recording doesn't affect a person's entitlement to workers' compensation as well either. Again, remember what I said, the the whistleblower acts, the OSHA whistleblower acts, that they cannot retaliate because they are filing a claim or because they reported an unsafe workplace. You cannot retaliate against them. And, you know, the rules for, you know, from state to state differ. So it, you know, again, you know, when we're talking, you know, you look at your state's plans as well too, just to define how, you know, what their states are, but your brokers will always help you with that and should, again. Lastly is keep those forms on file. I cannot stress to you, when I go in and I audit those forms, so many things are missing, and what are the risks of that? It's possible a violation. Do not send those copies to OSHA unless you are asked to do so, or you're in a high-risk industry. Remember when I started in the beginning, I said if you're exempt, that shows you if you're exempt, but you can also find if you're in high risk, usually construction, roofers, first responders, healthcare, those are usually high risk. Allow access to records. If your employees want to look at those records, they have a right to look at those. File and update for 5 years. Always keep those records in you know, your 5 years folders, and keep your workers' comp claims in a separate folders. I always like to use the red folder. Red reminds me of, you know, of an emergency. So keep those workers' comp folders. Do not place them in your personal file. That is a big no-no. So we don't want to do that, but keep them separate. And make sure that, again, that your loss runs and your workers' comp OSHA logs are pretty similar to what's each other. That, you know, therefore, because when OSHA comes in, they're going to look at your loss runs too, and they're going to walk onto your site, and they are going to inspect. And again, they are the agency that can come in without a subpoena. They do not need to give you advance notice. When they walk in, you have to allow them in. Unlike the Department of Labor or anyone else, when OSHA knocks, you better have that door open for them, and they are allowed to walk into your facilities and investigate and look at your OSHA logs. You cannot tell them, well, come back another week. That's not going to happen. You have to be ready and prepared. Always be prepared. Be proactive about what you're doing. Look at what's missing in your files and make sure that you're cleaning it up. We're falling into season, you know, now in South Florida, we're falling into season, especially in the restaurants and the club industry. It's a good time to clean it up before you get too busy. And before I end, just some key points that I wanted to bring out. Whenever you have an injury that's OSHA recordable and has to be completed within 7 calendar days, right? Determine if the incident is work-related or a new case. Evaluate for the general or specific recording criteria. Remember, I talked about the first aid, what's first aid and what's not, and post that summary by February 1st. Your general manager or the owner of the company has to sign off. It cannot be anyone but that principal of that company or general manager. It cannot be just anyone or your supervisor or HR. No, because, you know, that signature on there is stating that the information on that OSHA summary report is true and correct, and we have updated it. You have to post that in a visible area that all employees can see. You can post it, you know, laminate it if you want, but it has to be in a visible area, usually a break room. It is not for your, you know, your members or customers to look at, but it is for your employees to look at. Retain those records for 5 years, update them as needed, especially for someone who has been out on restricted duty or out on light duty. And electronically submit those OSHA laws to OSHA if you are not exempt from that. So all good things to keep in mind, very important. These are things that you don't want OSHA to be knocking at your door. You prefer us to be knocking at your door and conducting those audits for you. So always be prepared, look at what's missing, and just call us if you need any help. I hope that answers some of your questions and keep you alert of what's going on. Again, we're still in a pandemic state, and just keeping good things in place. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Excellent stuff. Thanks, Claire. Sorry, Cindy, I wanted to jump in real quick because, Claire, I've had this situation recently. Can you speak to the differences of working at home? So when we've got people working in remote environments or from their homes and whatnot, how does work comp come into play when people are working remotely?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question. We have a lot of hybrid and remote workers going on right now. And, you know, one of the things we need to ensure that their home is also a safe workplace. If they're telecommuting remote, we want to make sure that they sign off on a telecommuting agreement stating that, you know, they're going to maintain all the safety guidelines and follow all the safety guidelines as well. But listen, at the end of the day, if someone does have an injury or an accident while they're working, could it become work-related? Possibly. So telecommuting agreement, whether they're hybrid or remote, it's important for them to have that in place. And, you know, what did they say? 78%, the last Gallup report says 78% of the country is working remotely or hybrid. That's a lot. That's a big number.
Yeah. And one of the examples I gave when I was helping a client with this is when there's a work comp injury, it has to be connected to the work. So for example, if somebody works at home and they have a home office set up and they have somebody ring the doorbell, and so they get up to go answer the door and they trip over their dog on the way and hurt their back, that is not connected to the work. Yeah, they were working at home in their home office, but it wasn't an injury that was directly connected to the work, so not a work comp injury. But let's say they're working in their home office and they need to print some documents for a proposal that they're putting together, and they have to reach under the desk and do something with the printer, and they hurt their back doing that. Now it's connected to the work they're doing. So you really have to ask the question about it being directly connected to the work, and that's your differentiator.
And that's excellent, Rachel, because that's where, you know, I always say, call your carriers, explain to them what that injury was, let them define whether it's work-related or not. You know, they're always going to do an investigation. And your carriers work for you. That's who you really need to be reaching out to, is your workers' comp carriers, and have them walk you through. There's a lot of good, you know, there's a lot of the what ifs, you know, what if this happened, you know, theoretically, what if. But, you know, we want to be prepared and document everything that occurs if it could possibly become work-related.
Okay, Rachel, do you want to do the questions or do you want me to do it? I do it, okay. All right, Claire, the first question, what do you do when an employee is out for 60 days in 2020 and out for 60 days in 2021? How do you record days away from work if it's into your next year? So if it's a split year, how do you handle that?
You actually continue it because the injury happened in 2020 and it's the same injury and it's just continuing.
Correct.
Right. So you just continue that. It doesn't become, unless it's a new case, then it starts as a new days away from work. But all you're doing is just continuing to update the days away from work. And remember, the max is 180 days that you can post on there. That's it. There's no more. Okay. If they go beyond the 180 days, that's it. Not sure why OSHA stated that at one point, but it's just a number to remember.
Just to clarify, so there's no claim in 21. The getting well period is just falling over into 21, but it's a 2020 claim. Okay.
Right. It's only going to show up in the 2020. It's not going to show up in the 2021. But it's just continuing to monitor the days away from work.
Perfect. Okay. Second question, claim date closed. Is this the date the workers' comp carrier closes the claim? So the question is, who closes the claim, Claire?
Well, both the employer and the workers' comp carrier are responsible. So that's why I always say, go back and look at your loss runs, because I find that sometimes when I'm looking at loss runs, the close dates are incorrect. and the employee may have been closed, prior to that. And that can save you a lot of money, because if that date is incorrect, it does affect your dollar at the end of the day. Both the employer and the carrier are responsible, because the employer should remain responsible in communicating to the employee if they're, what's going on, make sure that they're trying to get back to work as fast as they can, offer light duty if possible. That helps you a lot. There's certain situations sometimes that we don't want that employee back because of the illness, that it can aggravate it even more. And that's a discussion I have with your carrier. But again, it's still the responsibility of the employer to stay in touch with the carrier and make sure that all the information is the same, and keep that log up to date.
To take this thought process a step further, let's suppose I'm still in therapy. So are you saying that I could still be going to therapy for the next X weeks, but the carrier closed it? And that would be considered a problem where the
Correct.
carrier should not have closed it? Okay.
Yep, and they probably will have to reopen it, because let's say they closed the case, right? They closed that claim, not a case, but they closed that claim. It's always a claim. They closed that claim a month ago, and that employee today starts complaining again about their back. Oh, my back's still not feeling well. I want to go back. Well, you have to call your carrier and say, hey, this employee X is still complaining. That carrier has to go back in, assign him to another therapist or physician for him to look at, and they're going to have to reopen that claim if they continue therapy. But that's a communication that you must have with the carrier. Let them know what's going on. Just because the case is closed doesn't mean it's closed forever. It's just happened to be closed, but it can always be reopened. Now, if it's a new injury, it's a new case.
Okay. Just for my own edification, what if the employee, how much communication should I be having with my employee? How you feeling? Because to me, that would just beg them to continue to prolong their issue, I guess. Do you know what I'm saying? How much?
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm sorry, Cindy.
How much interference should the employee or communication should our employers be having with the employee? Are we to redirect them to the carrier or to their doctors? Don't call me if you're still in pain. Call them, kind of thing.
Well, it works two ways, and that's an excellent question. It's not an interference. First thing, it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that the employee is doing well. You should be in contact with them, whether it's weekly or daily, however it is. If it's someone who's been out, you want to call them and express your sincere goodwill for them, and make sure that you are concerned for their health, and that you can't wait to get them back. Because what you're trying to do is create a wonderful environment that they want to come back to. Employees want to work in an environment that people care for them. They don't, if you become silent, that is that missing in action, as I call it. If you become silent, well, the employee's going to say, well, nobody cares. They don't care if I come back or not, so I'm just going to play this out. But every time that you're in contact with that employee and just calling them and how are you doing, you're feeling better, can't wait to get you back to work, or if you're able to offer light duty, that's where you need to be involved. Now, your carrier gets involved if the employee doesn't want to come back to work, is refusing to come back for light duty, or has been refusing to come back after they've been MMI, they have received maximum medical improvement, and they've been released back to work. That's when your carrier gets involved. When you let them know, hey, this employee, we have their DW-25, which is that form that the physician fills out and your carrier fills out as well, and is stating the employee is MMI, maximum medical improvement, and they're supposed to return back to work next week, and you're calling them up and you're saying, wow, we can't wait till you come back. We're so glad that you've been released. And all of a sudden that employee says, well, wait, I don't feel well. I'm not feeling well. And you as an employer need to start finding, well, what is it that you're not feeling well? You need to start you have to put on your workers' comp hat on, kind of remove that other hat off, put your workers' comp hat on, and start asking questions. Well, what is it that you're not feeling? Start documenting, then contact your carrier and say, hey, this is the information that I received for the employee. That carrier is going to turn around and call that employee and get their statement as well. So it's important to get that information. But if you do not follow up, if you don't call your employees, if you're not sincere about them coming back, yes, they will sit at home happily collecting forever and ever and ever and never want to come back. So I always say, send them flowers. You know, how if they had an injury an injury that resulted in surgery, my goodness, send them flowers or send them send them a card from the group saying, hey, we're missing you, can't wait till you come back. It's that engaging with your employees creates an environment that the leadership understands that their employees are valuable. And that's what you want to draw that attention, that they are valuable to you. Don't ignore them. Remember what I said. Ignoring a claim or ignoring an employee is not an excuse.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure to clarify that because I know a lot of employers are sometimes apprehensive to ask questions that they feel like they might be overstepping. But thank you for the clarification.
Contrary to that, a workers' comp claim is public information now. Remember that. Now it becomes public. It's not like a personal thing that falls under HIPAA. Workers' comp claim becomes public knowledge.
Actually, Claire, that was one of the questions that came up in the chat box. Is there a risk of asking all those specific questions due to HIPAA? So the answer to that is no.
Contrary.
Okay, I have another question for you, Claire. It says, regarding the days away from work, you have to post the log for the prior year and days away from work in the workplace. The days away from work aren't correct for the claim. The following year posting the log in the workplace won't reflect the prior year claims. Colleen, I'm not quite sure I understand. If you want to unmute yourself real quick and maybe ask Claire yourself, since I'm not understanding. Or did you understand that, Claire?
Threw me off a little bit.
Colleen, do you want to unmute yourself and talk?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. All right. This happened to me. So a claim takes place in 2000, and the employee misses 60 days. Then in 2001, they missed the 60 days. My log is already posted for 2000 in the workplace saying this is how many days were lost from work, and this is how many claims I had. So the following year, when I go to post that information and that other claim's still open, I'm not reflecting those additional days away from work or that claim because it happened in the year before, but in actuality, they lost 120 days, not 60 days.
Correct.
Does that make more sense?
Yes. So you're capturing only that 1 year, Colleen. You're capturing that 1 year. You can always update your summary. That's why it's important. I'll put you on mute. You can always update that summary because what happens is that you're only capturing that year. Let's 2020, 60 days. And then in February, you're going to post only for 2020, then 2021. So all you're capturing is that information. OSHA, what your loss runs are capturing is the number of days that person has been out. Does that make sense? So you're only capturing the 60 days for 1 year. You're not adding that person for 2021 because it wasn't a claim that happened in 2021. You're only capturing up to those 60 days, let's say. In your loss runs, your carrier will capture all those other days. Does that make sense?
I think so. Colleen, so basically you don't need to do anything for 21. It was captured in 20, even though the days ran over into 21. It's not a 21 claim, it's only a 20 claim. She wrote,
And-
thanks, I got it there. So she's
Yeah,
good.
and then here's real quick. Let's say you posted something in, already February 1st, and you realize that then all of a sudden you received something in, because remember, some of these lost runs or these claims take long to close, and all of a sudden you looked at your February 15, you received notice that there were additional lost days in 2020. You can always go back to that summary and update it, and just update it with the new summary, OSHA 300 logs, a summary. But don't tear up the old one. Just keep them together, which states that there was an update, because that happens all the time. It was just an update. But anything that you're capturing falls only within that calendar year.
Okay, everybody, that was the last question for Claire. If anybody has anything else, could you type it in for me now? If not, we're at an hour mark, so we are, I mean, we're more than happy to talk longer. But
Right.
so if you don't have anything else, we'll go. If you do, please let me know now.
Yep, I'm sorry it went out
Yeah.
so long, but I do get very passionate about this. And that little graphic that I had, if you want Cindy to send you a copy of it, it's a good way of keeping it in your OSHA log, so you remember what's recordable and what's not. And I'll send it over to her.
Claire, they don't need to get it from me. We will post the presentation on Certipay's website. So your presentation will be online shortly.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Yeah,
thank
we
you,
should have it up
everyone.
by the afternoon.
Yeah, you didn't run over your time. I just wanted to make sure we got to any more questions if necessary. You're good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Just at the time is 12:30.
Awesome information. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you,
Thank you,
Cindy.
guys.
And thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad to have you here. Our next coffee break will be in 2 weeks, the week after next, and our topic is going to be politics in the workplace. So put your seatbelt on and join us in 2 weeks. We will see you then.